And we are live. What's up, wrestling fans? I'm Doug.
And I'm Kevin.
This is Two Bros Wrestling Show. Thanks everybody for joining us tonight. I'd just like to say, reach out to your folks. If you are watching us on YouTube, don't forget, if you haven't already, to hit that subscribe button and get the bell notifications. If you're watching this on Facebook, do the Kevin. What are the Facebook things? It's not a like and a subscribe. What is that? A follow and a
yes.
Follow. Okay.
Follow us on Facebook. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Second show live, and this time, Doug, I'm going to look at the camera instead of you because I spent the last of about half of the last show looking to the side screen. So
it's okay. It's challenging. I mean, it's a very different world we live in now anyway, where, we see people on our screens and we want to look directly at the screen, but I've got the camera up here, I've got you down here, I've got an additional laptop over here with me, I've got my phone here. I have too many screens that I'm looking at, but well, let's just jump right into things. I'm sure that people don't want to hear us rambling about what screens we're looking at. So let's just get into the opening bell. Ding, ding, ding. Kevin, what do we have in the opening bell tonight? What do you want to bring up first in the headlines?
There's multiple headlines that comes out of this, the first story, but I think it's probably good to note that WWE had their first quarter earnings call this week, and some of the things that they spoke of we'll get into in our main event. So I'll save those, but some of the other highlights or lowlights, depending on your point of view, they realize that that ratings are suffering in this new period of no audience shows that we're in, and they promise that they're going to work on that. Apparently, Raw has been suffering more than SmackDown, which is interesting. I know a lot of our viewers might also be gamers, and if you are gamers, the WWE 2K game that comes out every year is a big moneymaker for WWE, and they usually hype it very significantly on their broadcasts. No game this year. There's no WWE 2K game for 2000. I guess it goes along with everything else. It makes sense that something WWE related or wrestling related or just entertainment related canceled. In respect to selling the rights to pay-per-views, Doug, I know that's something you and I have talked about on the show before. Again, apparently the current situation has, as it has most businesses, hurt the bottom line, and therefore what deals they said were close to coming true for their big pay-per-views going to another streaming service, your WrestleManias per se, not happening. Or at least not now.
That's probably good because it scares me that because one of the main selling points is for the network is those pay-per-views. Pay $6 for the WWE pay-per-views, or does it pay about $9.99 a month? I mean, I know that tiering has been talked about forever, but which one of those two are you going to have? So that's good. And as far as like talking about the game, it's my understanding. I mean, I haven't picked up a controller in years now at this point, but it's my understanding that the 2K20 was just full of so many bugs that it was unplayable. So maybe
typically
that's a good thing.
Pretty decent reviews, incremental changes year to year. This last one must have been just awful. Like you, it's probably, I think I've probably played since you have, but I don't know that I'll even have one for the PS4. I think my last 2K game was a PS3 version. So that's
right.
But yeah, it was pretty much awful. So they're probably going to rethink their contract and their developers on that game, and maybe try again next year. Is there anything else that you want to note out of that call, Doug?
I just want to briefly touch on it because I haven't read a lot about the call, but I've seen some other sites reporting that financially WWE is actually in a very healthy financial state, which makes all their releases from last week all that much more questionable. I really wonder. I mean, again, I get you want to keep the doors on and the lights open. That's not right. Let me try that again. You want to keep the lights on and the doors open, save that money so there people actually have jobs to come back to when all this finally is over. But it sounds like WWE could. I mean, I get that they're a business and maybe they're on track to hit $1 billion in their financial year, but they could have taken a little bit of financial hit and kept maybe not everybody, but kept more people on the payroll than they did with their finances being as healthy as they are.
I know
So
where our hearts are with the talent and the entertainment that we like, but taking that off and putting on my Vince McMahon business hat, I'm going to
no, I
say
get it.
to what you just said, it's probably worth mentioning. And I was going to say this for last about the call, but investors must have liked what they heard because the stock jumped for the
It did.
first time in a while afterwards. So there you go.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's an entertainment business, but the key word there is business. So after losing the XFL, losing WrestleMania. Not that it's lost, but it went from an 80,000 seat arena to an empty performance center. There was a lot of money lost there, but still, they're financially they're healthy. And again, I just throw it back to other companies, but other promotions aren't the WWE though, and I get that too. But other promotions went out of their way to take care of their talent and look after them. And a bright side, I can bright side it by saying that apparently most of the folks who did get released were people who have previously asked for releases, and at this point WWE's just cutting them loose. But that's all about the call I wanted to touch on is the financial aspects, what they were hitting on there.
Well, you mentioned other promotions, so I do have some headlines and some news out of a few other promotions.
Cool.
MLW, Major League Wrestling, which I've mentioned on here before, one of my absolute favorite indies. They announced this week a distribution agreement with NBC, which is the Morotis Broadcasting Company, and
Okay.
it doesn't have wide coverage. I mean, it's not like being on TNT or USA by any means, but it does broadcast in 12 different languages and reaches a couple of million people in their distribution around the world.
Nice.
They're also on BN Network. As well as having their flagship program, MLW Fusion, on their YouTube channel every week, and Fight TV, the Fight app every week. So this is one more way for this product to be seen by more viewers, more eyes. There's a lot of folks in AEW and NXT right now that have worked their way up through this promotion. They're kind of what, in my mind, Ring of Honor was 5-6 years ago. So good news for them, good news for talent that are looking for other places to work. And then, I guess the other thing I will say as far as news goes is when it comes to product, we're back to live for the first time in almost a month. There's been no live wrestling available on any platform. And this past week, WWE, for better or worse, and we'll get into that probably here at part of our main event, but as of Monday night on Raw, it's the first live TV we've had for wrestling in a month, pre-WrestleMania.
Yeah, and staying on the WWE, I just want to swing back through this. This is something that I've got on my notes here about for headlines. We've got Velveteen Dream in news and headlines and making it past the dirt sheets and wrestling promotional headlines to get into mainstream media with allegations of him sending inappropriate photos to minors, which he is denying. But I think it's worth mentioning that we have WWE star in the news for that. It looks like we're in the very, very early stages of investigation throughout, but he is of course denying this at this point. And all this apparently started on Reddit with some 17-year-old saying that this had happened, and then verifying, saying that the photo appears legitimate and the voicemails appear legitimate that I guess she's received, and her friends have also received similar photos, but they are even younger, all the way down to 15. So don't know where this is going to go out.
Let's hope he would be smarter than that. But I mean, for all involved, let's hope that this is not true, but we'll obviously follow. This is very early on. We don't want to lend credence one way or the other than to say, yeah, it's out there and we'll see where this goes. It's obviously not a pleasant topic.
No, but I just want to touch on that. And just one more WWE bit of news I want to touch on. If you watch Raw on Monday night, poor Kairi Sane took a terrible buckle bomb from Nia Jax. And, when I was watching it again, I don't watch a lot of wrestling live, but I always watch my replays that I have DVR'd. But when I was watching it live, it looked like when Nia picked her up, it looked like, to me anyway, that that's that look I have when I'm lifting, and it's that, oh crap, I don't have a good hold on this weight is coming down. You know the feeling I'm talking about. You know the look when you're up in the air, and it looks like. I mean, it just looks so incredibly unsafe and dangerous in the way she took that. Apparently she's okay, but
Yeah.
and that goes back to a history that Jax has, I believe. It was either What Culture Wrestling, or I believe it was What Culture Wrestling had had come up with a figure like out of every 39 matches that Nia is in, she ends up legitimately injuring an opponent. And so wrestling is going to have injuries and people are going to get hurt. That's just, I mean, it ain't ballet, but that's a lot. I'm wondering, what do you think about that?
I think it'll be interesting to see what Sane has to say about it, if she has anything to say about it. I know that, last year, or well, not last year, but over the last few years, that unsafe worker tag was given to Seth Rollins because of a number of injuries that happened in matches of his. And, whether it was Sting or, Finn Balor or some of the folks that were on the bad end of those injuries, when they would talk about it, they would abdicate any blame to Rollins and that it was unfair. So yes, we've had a couple of injuries. Yes, it didn't look safe, but I would be interested to hear what the talent thinks, as opposed to
I'm
necessarily labeling her unsafe, which is one of those things that can follow you around, whether it's warranted or not. But yeah, I'm just happy she's all right.
Absolutely. I mean, especially after that nasty concussion she took a few months ago. I mean, Kyrie's on her way out the door. I'm certain of that. She's going back to Stardom. She's going back to Japan as soon as her contract will allow for. I'm surprised, honestly, that she wasn't one of those names that, they went ahead and just cut her loose early to go ahead and get her out the door. But it did look nasty. And, I know, I believe, I'm not sure if Ember Moon herself has ever commented on publicly on it, but I know her husband has had tweets that he's later deleted about what an incredibly unsafe worker Nia Jax is and how Ember Moon has suffered injuries at her hands. But again, I just wanted to bring it up. I thought the opening bell was a place to mention that. Anything else in the headlines?
I think it's almost time, Doug, for the main event.
Main event it is then, brother. You want to start us off?
Yeah, well, I'll start off by saying if you're watching, feel free to comment. Eagle Eye Hager here is watching for comments. Last week, we really appreciated the feedback that we received. If you have any opinions on what we're talking about, feel free to chime in. That said, setting up our main event, our topic this week, as we'd promoted on our social media pages this past week, is that we are in a time of change with the current situation, obviously the pandemic, and like a lot of industries who are learning new ways of doing things and learning maybe some things that they were doing, not as efficiently as they are now learning they can do. So there's going to be a lot to be learned from this period. So tonight we thought we'd talk a little bit about what some of these changes have been in wrestling and which ones we like, don't like, and for the long term, which ones we would see maybe continuing. And I'll start the conversation by just going back to that investor call we mentioned in the opening bell. Vince McMahon himself, the most powerful man in this entire industry, said he believes the business, and this is a quote, has fundamentally changed thanks to the pandemic and right now. So that's the most powerful guy in the industry that sets the tone for what everyone else does, like it or not. And he's basically saying that the changes we are experiencing, many of them are going to be permanent. Probably worth saying that no audience is probably not one of those that will continue.
Let's hope not.
As much as Daniel Bryan likes it, but so outside of the fact that there's no audience, let's talk about some of these things, Doug, that are currently occurring in wrestling. What you like, what you don't like, and what you think is going to continue. You kick us off with one.
So I definitely see, for our wrestlers who are aging out of a WWE schedule, which I think that's going to change anyway. But our wrestlers who are aging out of that schedule, Undertaker is a one match a year kind of guy, maybe two if the Saudi money is there, and Vince can get him to Saudi with the right opponent. I think going forward he'll go to Saudi, but yeah, I think for folks like the Undertaker, maybe even a Goldberg down the line too, the more cinematic, like we saw with the Boneyard at WrestleMania, I think that is definitely something we're going to see a lot more of in the future. We've got our Money in the Bank, Die Hard coming up, where they're trying to get to the top of the tower to get the belt off of the ring on the top suspended on the roof, whatever. So I see that more like a shot as more of a Die Hard, some sort of action movie where they're moving through the offices. That of course is not going to be like anything we've seen before, and I'm kind of excited about that. When I first saw it, I thought that got to be. But I see more like Gargano and Ciampa, their Rebel Heart Blackheart match. The blow off match to end that rivalry. We're going to see more cinematic stuff like that, definitely. And I think it has a place for maybe more violent stuff like that Gargano Ciampa match, maybe like the Edge Orton match that could have been done that way, and definitely to get more miles out of legends like the Undertaker. That I do believe is going to stick around.
Edge Orton is going to be, I think, a good blueprint for what we're likely to see with that Money in the Bank match, because they basically fought all throughout the Performance Center, through offices, that sort of thing. So it's probably going to have a similar feel. Vince himself said that this is something that he has actually really enjoyed, the cinematic filming, and that can mean a lot of different things. Some of the examples you noted, but one that we didn't like, the Funhouse match at WrestleMania was insane, but extremely entertaining. I don't know how many of those you can do until there starts to be somewhat of diminishing returns. I know that this past week on Impact, the Sami Callihan Ken Shamrock match very much reminded me of Gargano and Tommaso Ciampa's match. They fought outside, and for a while I thought they were going to end up on top of a semi truck. I mean, it was there, and I'm like, they're going to do the same thing, and that's the rub. I think you're going to see more of it. It hasn't really happened so much in AEW yet, but with Matt Hardy there in the main event picture, that's coming. I understand right now the necessity for it. I have enjoyed some of the matches more than others. I do agree, long term, it's probably going to stick around, but I think that's one of those that sticks around for better or worse, because I'm just not sure a year, 2 years from now, if I'm going to enjoy them as much as I've enjoyed them over the last month.
Yeah, you absolutely have to. I don't say use it sparingly. You have to pick and choose when you're going to use something like that. And again, I think it's great for, again, we can get so many more years out of Undertaker if he's doing boneyard matches and matches like that. We do the Funhouse match. You can't use that match now at next year's WrestleMania or next week's SmackDown, or, you're not going to be able to replicate that, and you shouldn't try. But, I think a more cinematic approach can be taken. And you can get creative, you can get experimental, and maybe with some cool things with Karrion Kross now could be done in NXT too, with just working that. I mean, dude's a huge film buff anyway. I can see him having creative input to do some very cinematic stuff in NXT as well.
I'm not a expert on like which WrestleMania was which, but I mean, you can go back 15, 20 years. This is not necessarily new, but you can go back to like Roddy Piper versus Goldust in that backlot brawl match that they did at WrestleMania years ago, or some of the Boiler Room matches that Mick Foley did. So it's, these sorts of things have happened. And I think in those kinds of, once in a blue moon instances, they can really stand out. I'm afraid, as with a lot of things wrestling, when everyone starts copying it and doing it, and it becomes like a new style of like, we're all doing this now, that it will definitely lose its impact for me. It'll be harder to keep it looking original if they do too many of them.
Yeah, and then you'll have a whole bunch of like Michael Bay looking wrestling productions, just like your wife's talking about.
That it would get tired quick. That's what I'm afraid of, is even the ones that I think have done well. And I think Undertaker is, to your point, that's one that maybe you save them for him, and do them at WrestleMania as a special attraction. But if it becomes like, Hell in a Cell with these things, that instead of being like these once in a blue moon things to blow off feuds, you just have them every, year because it's that time of year to have one, and you have 2 or 3 on the card, it just loses something. And it is wrestling, so they do take a good idea and will run it into the ground.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. But what else coming out of this are we going to see in the future?
Well, as one that I don't know that we will see in all companies, but for some historical perspective, wrestling wasn't always a live product. You had special shows that would go live. For the most part, you'd set up a ring somewhere and do what they've done at the Performance Center and what AEW has done. You would film a bunch of shows at once, save on those production costs, and then spread them out over time. Vince McMahon in his conference call admitted that even though they've lost a lot of revenue because they're not able to tour and they've lost all that, WrestleMania money, all that, they've extremely reduced their expenses because they're filming large batches of shows at a time. Do you think the temptation will be there for some of these, like AEW had a couple months worth at least in the can? Ring of Honor, Impact, they've continued to do this. They've never gone to that live every week approach, at least with their current product. Do you think that there will be a temptation for some of these promotions, maybe even Vince on certain shows, to do batch filming, 2 or 3 shows in a sitting to save on production costs that live maybe isn't where it's at?
To say, I think to a certain extent, we're going to see some of the smaller productions. We're going to continue to see Ring of Honor. We're going to continue to see Impact do that. We are not going to. I do not think it's in the cards for WWE. They're saving on cost right now because they have all those in the can. They've already gone back to live shows. That's their main selling point to the USA Network and Fox because they are a live sport and they're going to grab the eyes of people just like any live sporting event. People aren't DVRing like, football, baseball, basketball, or all those other sport. I don't know. I'm not a sports guy, so go sports. But they're not. At least I don't think people are DVR those to watch later. Those are live events they watch then and there. And right now, I think that the networks, both of them, are being generous considering the situation that we're in as a global community, and saying, we understand that your selling point was live events, but right now you can tape, and we're cool with that. Of course, Vince has
To
already
my
went back to
understanding,
a.
it's going to be a mix of live and tape from here on, which, and maybe this is a little bit of a side, but there's 2 reasons why live was preferred. And it really started when you had the Monday Night Wars, and that was spoilers. One show spoiling it for the other show, the internet, which then made it possible for people to spoil it for everyone else. If it's live, you don't want to know the outcome of the baseball game. That's why you don't record it. You watch it live. You don't want to know the results of the shows. So why, when you don't have, and the feel of a live audience, there's more energy, they say, and I can see that, than you see normally on a tape show. But when there is no audience and there is not really that threat of spoilers, it's curious to me why Vince would bother to go back to live, considering how well it has worked under the circumstances to stay with a tape show. The advantages that you would have about spoilers and live energy from a crowd are both negligible in our current environment. So that's kind of an odd choice.
I agree because I've really wondered about that, especially because I've read a lot and seen a lot of different reports that say the big push to make wrestling an essential service, was based around those television contracts that WWE had, where they needed to move to live because they would be penalized, I guess, in their contracts. But it's since come out that both networks are like, no, look, we are in a global crisis. We you're doing is fine. Keep doing that. Of course, they're going straight back to live TV, and AEW plans to start going live next month too. Now that they're going to go back to Daly's place because wrestling is an essential service, so they can do that in Florida. So
David Poole
I don't know.
has a point here that actually I was going to bring up, and I think it's a good time to bring it up because this is something that wrestling used to do a lot more of, and are doing it again because of the current situation, and I like it. David mentions about more pre-recorded promos. I consider this separate than what we were talking about earlier with the cinematic matches, but these are more vignettes. These are things that wrestling used to do a lot more of as far as building feuds, building the characters so that you know a little bit more about a character before a character debuts. But if you look at what like AEW did this last week with Scorpio Sky, or what SmackDown's been doing the last 2 or 3 weeks with the Jeff Hardy story that it's telling in segments, there's really great ways of getting the feuds and the characters over that doesn't involve them actually wrestling in the ring. Honestly, that Scorpio Sky thing should have been in the first couple of weeks that AEW was on the air. But now, because of the current situation, they're having to do these things to stretch things out. And I think like David, I like that type of scene setting, and I would like to see that continue more, even after we get back to quote unquote normal, whatever the new normal is going to be.
Right.
Do you like the vignettes, Doug?
I do like the vignettes. Actually, we're going to talk about. I'm really hung up on carrying cross now.
It's going to take some getting used to.
It is. I still call the Viking guys, War Machine too, and it took me forever to go from Steen to Owens, but I eventually got there. But just the vignette that they shot, they showed this past week on NXT. It reminded me of kind of like a Quentin Tarantino meets David Lynch kind of vignette, with a pinch of natural born killers in there, but that's kind of the character anyway. But I really like that to build the character. I like seeing more of things like that. So,
I think we will, because I think they're working well, and they might realize that it helps get the characters and the storylines over. One thing that,
hey, bro. Sorry, brother.
One thing that was mentioned on the call, Doug, that Vince McMahon had, and this one's a little more troubling. I agree with you that we're definitely we're going to get back to live shows being the standard, not tape shows. But how about touring? WCW back in the day would set up in one location, and every week people would show up at that location, and you had your studio already. You saved money on touring. They would be live, but they would never change the studio. Vince hinted that they may do less live shows than they did in the past. And do you think that's a good thing? I know NXT is always in the same location, but if they start doing the same for Raw and SmackDown, do you think that the energy is going to be there?
I'm not. Yeah, that's something I really hadn't thought about. I mean, you then can make NXT. If you take them on the road occasionally, you make them it becomes a feature then, just like Lesnar. The whole show becomes like a feature player then, because oh look, Raw is going to be in this city on this date, SmackDown's going to be in this city on that date. Otherwise it's wherever. It worked for Impact. It worked for Impact. We've years and years ago we went to the Impact Zone in Orlando. The Impact wasn't touring then. I think that was a big draw to wrestlers at that time for jumping ship from the WWE. They could go to Orlando, shoot their shows, and then have some time off instead of having 6 days on, like 1 day off, or whatever that crazy WWE schedule is. And it can make for some healthier guys too all around. If WWE were to back off of a schedule like that,
As I've heard NXT, I mean, they have experienced the WWE overall brand does with having everything there at Full Sail University. When the NXT shows, they don't seem to suffer. That crowd is energetic into what's going on. I do think that, I don't know that it will be a permanent fixture of wrestling, but I think it may be a long time before you're seeing 80,000 seat WrestleManias. Small studios with a lot of energy that maybe might fit under whatever the new guidelines will be in a year and a half from now, wherever we are with this pandemic. I think smaller shows in one location that they can, be personally responsible for the sanitation and such of their facilities, that might actually be something that sticks around, if not for the long haul, for at least a good long while from now.
I agree. And there is something really cool about those smaller arena shows, or just the small setting shows, like the NWA Power that's on YouTube. Love that. That's so old school for guys like us. That's what we grew up on anyway, that setting. And things like that. NXT, you have that small, intimate NXT crowd. or even going back to the impact zone. I do really love that setup. So, and again, it goes back to the health of the guys too. If they're not touring, you've got, TV, you've got house show, days off TV, house show, you've got that, then pay-per-view, house show, TV. It will be interesting. It's going to be a very big change to the business overall, because house shows are where you work out what you're going to be doing on live TV too. So of course AEW is doing not doesn't do house shows right now, and it doesn't seem to hurt them. So maybe it's a change we can see.
You said about old school guys like us. My next change I want to talk about that we are seeing in this era. I will, and this is not trying to. I guess for those who maybe have watched wrestling only for the last 20, 25 years, it might take a little bit of setup, but enhancement talent, or as they were called in the day, jobber. The jobber is back all of a sudden, and not just in WWE. AEW is doing it as well. And for those who maybe came of age in the 90s and don't remember pre-90s wrestling, pretty much from the start of TV in the 50s, when wrestling was one of the first things to come on broadcast television, to all the way through the 80s, when Doug and I, were really becoming huge fans. You would not see superstar versus superstar on television. It was very rare. What TV was basically your commercial to get folks to buy the pay-per-view, where you would see your big star versus, you would see Ric Flair wrestle on pay-per-view. You wouldn't see him wrestle, on Saturday evenings. It was very, very rare when that happened. And if he was wrestling somebody who was also a superstar, that was even more rare. And then prior to pay-per-views, it was to try to get folks interested in going to their local arena to see, Buzz Sawyer take on Tommy Rich or something along those lines. You didn't have what happened when TV and primetime cable became their biggest concern over getting a higher rating than the competition. And that's what started superstar versus superstar. And they, in a lot of ways, would give away matches that could have been saved for pay-per-views or your arena shows in order to pop that big rating. I thought because the cat was out of the bag, you'd never be able to go back to the day when a nobody would wrestle a superstar. But that is what we're seeing again. Doug, do you like the jobber matches? Do you think that they do a good job in getting the main guy that you're wanting over?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about the jobber match, so I'm glad you brought this up, because I've been reading a lot on Twitter and just like in the wrestling sphere over the past week over the Kenny Omega match that was on AEW with was the guy's name Angel? I've forgotten the guy's name, but anyway, because AEW has a lot of Georgia talent they're going through right now with as the enhancement talent. I think most of the shows we're watching right now are filmed at QT Marshall's gym in Georgia, so they've done a lot with the local talent there, and I really liked it because it does two things. It gets your local talent over. It gets those guys exposure, because nobody loses anything if they lose to Kenny Omega on a televised match. No, everybody wins there. I really think, because first of all, we get to see Kenny Omega wrestle. Second of all, we get exposed to somebody new who may be somebody someday. We get to see some new talent. We get to see something fresh, something that we're not going to find anywhere else. And it's not a complete squash, which I love. I really like that. And again, Kenny Omega has nothing to prove at this point. Anybody who's saying that he should go out and just completely squash, so that's not the character. That's not what he needs to do at this point. That's not where he is in his career. So I do like those matches. If nothing else, it is kind of like getting the new guys over. That's what I'm seeing it.
I'm going to slightly disagree with you on here. I I didn't think that the person that we don't know should not have gotten as much offense as he got on Kenny Omega. I like the jobber matches, and maybe it's because it reminds me of 70s, 80s wrestling. To me, it does two things. The jobber match is to, one, make the superstar look like a superstar and not have a 50-50 kind of match, which most Raw and SmackDown AEW matches end up being. And it gets over their finishing moves. You got a jobber who you throw around like a rag doll. I mean, let's think back to our days. You and I can, I'm sure, name like the Mulkeys, Chick Donovan. I mean, Iron Mike Sharp. I mean, these guys never won. They get in a couple of minutes of offense, but for the most part, they get their butts whipped for the entirety of a match. And it was primarily their job was to make the superstar look like a superstar and make that finishing maneuver look deadly. I like the jobber matches. Do I think you can go back to an era where that's all that you have? No. But NWA Power had kind of been doing it, and because they had that old school feel anyway in that studio, and now you see the majors doing it kind of out of necessity. I think it will stick around. I don't think there'll be, maybe 2 or 3 of those a show, but I think they can, if done right, they can really accomplish a lot for what you're trying to do to build a guy. What they've done with Aleister Black over the time of he's been taking on these jobbers, making the black mask look like he's taking someone's head off. They've done more in this no audience era by putting him against jobbers than they had managed to do with him all the way up to this point on the main roster anyway.
Yeah, this is true. This is true about Black. But I just like seeing new blood out there. I really, if we were trying to build, and I go back to that Omega match because I think your argument is solid. If you're trying to build somebody, you don't really need to build Kenny Omega. If if you don't know who Kenny Omega is already, and you're a wrestling fan, where have you been? I mean, really,
Some folks will say that he has not been he hasn't made himself the center of attention the way you think that a Kenny Omega, who was, PWI's wrestler of the number 1 on the PWI 500 for, 2 years ago, 3 years ago now, he hasn't really been centrally booked. And so for folks that may only know the AEW version of Kenny Omega, I don't know that you need to see him going against a guy that you don't know that well, taking that much. Like, think back to when Razor Ramon lost to 1-2-3 Kid. Everybody's like, oh my gosh, this kid who we've seen get beat week after week after week. This was somebody who was brand new. And if he'd been in a couple other competitive matches, I'd have been okay with him getting in some offense on Kenny Omega. I would have preferred not see him get that offense in first time we've seen him on screen. Because is he going to be a star, or is he just one of these guys that are going to filter through the way some of these other jobbers have? That was a little harder to tell.
As long as nobody is kicking out of a one-winged angel, I think we're okay. If we have a jobber kick out of a one-winged angel, then I'm going to cry wolf. But I think we're cool right now with that.
We're going to agree to disagree on that one instance, but in general, we both think the jobbers might be around for a bit.
I think they're here to stay. Yeah, I think so.
It takes me back to another era. Something that is happening now, Doug, that I think is not going to continue because, one, Vince doesn't like it. It's working well now, and I'm not sure that I would like it overall. But the increased I'm going to put these two together to help us save some time. But the increased verbalization we're seeing, the trash talking, the back and forth trash talking, and then the breaking of the fourth wall, where you got a guy who looks directly in the cameras like, "Hey, I'm talking to his opponent." It's working extremely well now because they don't have that audience to play off of. So look into the camera, get intense. You don't have to yell and scream. But in the long term, when the audience comes back, I think they'll probably go back to, doing the show more for that live audience reaction. And Vince would not probably care for, like, Drew looking at the camera instead of looking at the crowd.
Right. Well, yeah, no, I agree with that because, Drew was talking. I've read interviews where Drew's talked about, looking in the camera and doing the "this is for you." There's no audience there for him to talk to, and then he realized, oh wait, I shouldn't do that. I need to go climb the ring and pose with the belt now, because you don't do that. You don't Deadpool in WWE. I do like the intense staring into the camera. Edge, I think, cut one of their best promos when he came back and was it SmackDown where he does the promo where he's just kind of a quiet, angry, almost coming across as like the very dangerous man, just talking calmly, a little bit of a growl to it. I do love those promos where there's dead on into the camera, but yeah, I don't think that's going to go over once we get back to arenas. I mean, because wrestling it's a team sport, and a member of the team is the audience, so we're being part of the team right now anyway. And when we get back to, we're not going to get to full arenas for a while, I'm sure, but when we do get back to audiences in attendance. They'll be small, they may be 6 feet apart for 6 months or whatever, but
And
they'll.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, but we'll have that interaction with the crowd again. Where right now, I think we're all agreeing that the interaction is with the camera because they're the people on the other side who are there and watching, and
And
not
as far as
in
the
the arenas.
verbalization goes, like the increase, like, trash talking and all that, it's great. But I think
I
a
love
lot of
it.
what they're doing now is to make that noise that isn't there otherwise. I think once you have the live audience back, some of what they're doing now is so great and it's so subtle. But I think when you have the crowd noise piped in over top of it, you're not going to be able to do it in the same way. So I think that's something probably pretty particular to this era, where you're not going to have those last man standing matches like you had at WrestleMania between Seth and I mean KO. You'll have a little bit of it, but they won't be talking to each other the entire time to make sure that noise is there, because there's not the need for it. It would get a little bit lost in the translation.
Yeah, that's true. But and again, WWE does not do themselves any favors with that well lit performance center with nobody around it. AEW, and well, yeah, fanboy. I mean, I've got our AEW behind me here tonight, but AEW does it so much better with just some talent around the ring. Your heels on one side, faces on the other. Cheering on the respective heel or face in the ring, making the noise. It really adds to that live sphere that is really missing in WWE right now, where you do have, I think the verbalization is a lot more noticeable on WWE than it is AEW. But I think it is good right now, but it will eventually be gone. Yeah, I agree with you there.
And before we leave this topic, I will also give credit to the men and women, because this is actually a great teaching tool for them. It's something I didn't have on my list, but as we're talking, I'm realizing that because it's so quiet and they're verbalizing, they have had to be a lot more careful about their calls, especially now that
Mm-hmm.
they've gone back to being live. Normally you're in a match and you're hiding, in the lockup with your hair or some way to speak to your opponent about what the next move is going to be. And now when you can hear a pin drop and you're hearing every word they're
Right.
saying to each other, they've had to be extra careful about calling spots. And kudos to them that it's not become really noticeable that they're calling matches right now. But that's something obviously they won't have to be as careful about. But it's probably good that they're being, learning how to be more quiet, because nothing I hated worse than there at the end, Triple H. No offense to Triple H, but man. There at the end in his pay-per-view matches, you knew everything that was coming because his spots were so loud. He would call it.
Yeah.
Watch for the
All
knee.
right.
Oh, yeah.
All right, we're out of our main event. Let's get to our big finish, and hopefully nobody kicks out.
Doug, what was your match of the week? Let's see whether or not we do what we did last week.
I don't think we're going to this week because I'm going big. I'm going sort of outside of our big two that we often talk about right now. And again, I am. I think we've joked before that I should be the Dynamite Dougler because of my fanboy ishness with AEW. But I went AEW related, and I went with the Young Bucks. Being the Elite 200th episode, where we have Matt and Nick Jackson wrestling the entire episode to make sure the brother Buck is ready to get back in the ring and ready that he's 100%, and they basically go throughout the Bucks compound. It was very entertaining. You had your high spots, you had your comedy, you had your hints of violence. It was it's my match of the week. Go back and watch being the Elite episode 200 if you haven't seen it yet. Very entertaining, and just a lot of the Bucks doing what they do best and doing it against each other.
I was going to go at first with the very first match I saw all week, which was the Aleister Black Austin Theory match on Raw, which was fantastic. It was actually a pretty good. It was that one on your radar too?
So close, dude. So
Well,
close.
it was a good week for actual in-ring action between the NXT cruiserweight tournament they have going on and the TNT tournament on AEW, which had the great main event with Sabian and Rhodes. There was a lot to choose from, but I'm going to go with Impact this week. Willie Mack and Ace Austin. Ace Austin has been a great X Division champion. Willie Mack is also another great competitor, a compelling in-ring performer and character outside the ring. And Austin has held that belt long enough that it meant something for Willie to win, and it was a great contest. This is the first week that Impact is being affected the way that other promotions have been. This is the first show they've done without an audience because all the others had been taped so far in advance. So kind of like WrestleMania, where they're doing their pay-per-views on TV. This was the first night of Rebellion. Week 2 night 2 is airing next week, and they had a lot of good matches, pay-per-view worthy matches. But Willie Mack versus Ace Austin, if you haven't seen it, go check it out. Definitely worth the time.
Cool. So I know we also talk about, maybe not necessarily worse matches, maybe worse matches if there was something really ugly, or sometimes we talk about just our embarrassments for the week. You got anything that makes you embarrassed to be a wrestling fan this week, Kevin?
Well, I was going to, I was going to hurt your feelings, Doug. I was going to give an AEW, the bubbly bunch dancing. There's a reason that you never saw Tully Blanchard doing the worm or something like that. I'm sorry, but as bad as I wanted to do that just to get your goat with an AEW slam, I can't overlook just how god awful that final segment of SmackDown was on Friday. Triple H, love him or hate him, the man has a very distinguished career, deserved better than that. You talk about falling flat because there was no audience. I don't know that an audience would have saved it. It was so overlong and so forced. And once Vince McMahon came out and started rambling, that made all the dancing on AEW like, okay, I'll forgive Chris Jericho because it was just bad.
Okay, first of all, the bubbly bunch is awesome. And we just planted the seeds for a Sammy Guevara face turn at some point because Jericho's so mad at him because he's a better dancer.
he's a much better dancer. Your embarrassment, bro?
And secondly, I totally agree with your brother. I really do like Triple H of all the way back to the DX days. Not so much, but when he was the Northern aristocrat, but moving to the rebellious Triple H of DX and that, some of this stuff has fallen flat over the years. I think he and Shawn Michaels in the ring, it's almost like dad joke humor at this point. It's kind of cringy, but it's kind of like what DX has been in the past couple of years. But then when poor Vince comes out, I know the dude is having a very hard time right now. XFL gone, getting sued by what guy was the commissioner or whatever, the XFL, that does not look good. His company, is actually doing financially well, but still he's got to be the guy that makes those difficult decisions, and so he's got to be under a lot of stress, and everything about that when Vince came out just seemed off. It was like this bizarre ad lib roast of Triple H, and he just went to a place where he's actually calling Triple H Paul, which I don't think Vince would do something like that. But everybody knows it's Paul Levesque, Triple H, but I don't know. Something just seemed incredibly off about all that. Clearly it was planned for Vince to, call it into it and go and walk out, and then Triple H to say he's shutting it down, and then the lights start going off and everything. But I don't think Vince had anything planned when he went out there except to say roast his son. I don't know. But I was just left shaking my head.
This was one that it would have definitely benefited to not be live if they would have just cut that at the Performance Center and then looked at it. I don't see any of those three guys letting that go on air. They would have edited that down or reshot it, and it would have been we all would have been much better for it. But let's see if we agree on the performance of the week, since we agree on the embarrassment of the week. For me, I know I've praised her on here before, but Zelina Vega is absolutely one of the best in the business. So this past Monday night, she was in the opening segment, which helped set up the main event. She was on commentary for her, her man's match, Austin Theory, while her actual man in real life, her husband, was the opponent, and she gets to trash talk him. She was then involved in a backstage segment, and then was in the main event also. She was in 4 or 5 segments in the night and was excellent in all of them, as she most often is. So for carrying such a heavy load on Monday night and not being overexposed, just doing it all extremely well, Zelina Vega had a great night on Monday.
I once again, we've been friends and wrestling fans for too long, bro, because I completely agree with you. I was going to try and find a way and not make it awkward to force a Zelina Vega conversation into this in before we wrap up the show, because I have my own ideas where this is going, because it makes her and her boys look so much more important throughout. They were, in so many segments throughout the night. She was so involved in Raw, I mean, I'm wondering, are we? It's almost like we're rolling toward the feud with McIntyre versus Vega, which
I mean, she was a one-woman show.
Which I know we're not, but I'm wondering if we get some future booking with Black going the way that Black is going. If he eventually gets that Money in the Bank, then he can cash it in at any time. Then she brings him, or at least starts courting him, bring him to her stable as somebody who can actually go after Drew McIntyre. Maybe we have some back and forth, some will he, won't he? No, he's the baby face, but trying to pull him to the dark side and get her to join him to join her stable, where we have Andrade, we have the Austin Theory, who's thank you. Yeah. We have these folks, we bring him in as well. And, she starts to build a stable of winners, I'm wondering, that's my fantasy booking there, but I totally agree. I mean, and all of her guys look so much more important, even playing the cowardly heels when they're like, yeah, no, I'm not getting the ring right now.
That when she was trying to get him to go in there, like, not me.
Right. I mean, well, we were talking earlier about, if you don't know Kenny Omega, and this is what you've seen of Kenny Omega in AEW today, you're like, what's the big deal? I think if you haven't seen Austin Theory, and then you're seeing him like this, you're like, well, what's the big deal about this kid too? But I thought all their segments were great. I thought they were, that entire stable, that all of Monday was great. So I absolutely have to agree with you there.
Let's not forget too, she can really work. So if they wanted to go into a way where, she doesn't have to be the one, taking on the male wrestler, since there's not intergender in, WWE. But if you wanted to do intergender tag team matches or things like that, she could get her comeuppance still with the right female performer brought in on the other side. So, I mean, there's a lot of ways they could go with it, but man, that girl was just a one-woman show from beginning to end. I was just so impressed with her work. But you mentioned Money in the Bank, Doug. We're wrapping it up. You want to say next week, right? We got Money in the Bank preview show here.
Yes. When is Money in the Bank? What's the date on that?
2 weeks from tonight. So yeah, we'll go.
So yeah, it sounds like next Sunday we should be doing a Money in the Bank show then. Absolutely.
So join us next Monday. Listen to me. Next Sunday at 8:00, and we'll preview Money in the Bank, and we'll talk a little bit about what we think is going to happen, what should happen, and and we'll go through the headlines, and hopefully you'll join us again. Thanks everyone for joining now. Make sure, again, if you're watching, you're either subscribing if you're on YouTube to our channel, or following us if you're doing it on Facebook.
That's right, Kevin. You couldn't have said it better yourself, brother. I will wrap us up with the 3 count. I've been Doug.
And I have been Kevin.
And we've been talking wrestling. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Stay safe, stay inside, wash those hands.